This is DW News, live from Berlin. The Kremlin's fiercest critic, Alexei Navalny, is laid to rest in Moscow.
Navalny! Navalny!
Thousands gather outside the church in defiance of riot police. Crowds bid farewell to the opposition leader who died in a remote Arctic penal colony. Also coming up, Iran holds elections in a test of public sentiment following nationwide anti-government protests. But authorities struggle to get voters to the ballot box. Plus, cocaine imports flood Europe and demand from users hits record highs. Peru, where much of the drug originates, calls for an international task force to take down the supply chain. I'm Nicole Fröhlich. To our viewers on PBS in the United States and all of you joining from around the world, welcome. It's good to have you with us. The Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, has been laid to rest in Moscow. The fiercest critic of President Vladimir Putin died 2 weeks ago in a remote Arctic penal colony. Thousands gathered outside the church where his funeral was held in defiance of a heavy police presence and warning from the Kremlin. One human rights group says at least 67 people have been arrested at nationwide tributes.
Crowds of mourners chant, "Russia will be free," as they queue outside the church in Moscow where the funeral of Alexei Navalny was held. The anti-corruption campaigner, who once galvanized huge protests against the Russian government, also brought thousands to the streets after his death to bid him farewell. Despite the police blockade and the risk of arrest.
There are something like 10,000 people here. No one is afraid. We came here because we want to honor the memory of the person who was not scared of anything.
For many of those here, it's just important to see people who agree that what happened is terrible and that there are a lot of people who think this.
Authorities banned a traditional public burial, and the Kremlin warned against what they called protests taking place outside the church. Inside the church, Alexei's family and friends paid their final respects. Before the coffin was transported to a cemetery near the banks of the Moskva River. Where his parents said goodbye to their son. Navalny's wife, Yulia Navalnaya, was not present at the funeral. She is living outside of Russia, saying she could be arrested if she returns. She posted her farewell to her husband on social media, thanking him for 26 years of happiness. She has vowed to continue her husband's work.
DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Egger told me he's not surprised that so many defied the authorities to say their goodbyes to Navalny.
Well, Nicole, what could they do? In the end, it's a funeral. And basically, the fact that several dozen people were arrested, according to human rights groups, already shows that this was not your regular funeral. Of course, they didn't want this show of solidarity with Alexei and his family. And of course, they got what they got. I mean, it's Moscow, it's Navalny's heartland, it's where people are the most politicized and where there's a huge, well, at least a significant, let's say, layer of opposition to Putin. So to me, there was no surprise in the turnout. And frankly speaking, these people are brave because anyone who went there could have risked arrest on a completely trumped up on fake charges. So yes, I mean, kudos to them all.
To people outside Russia, Navalny was the face of the anti-Putin opposition. How symbolic a figure is he among the Russian public?
Well, look, the Russian public that was anti-Putin and still continues to be, this minority, they, of course, knew about Navalny. Not everyone agreed with him. There are other leaders of opposition, including in exile. But definitely the fact that he was in Russia attracted huge attention to him. And he was one of the, I would say, top 2-3 political prisoners that were in Putin's hands. So in a sense, I think those who dislike Putin, they always acknowledged his bravery. But of course, there's a wide swathe of public opinion in Russia which believes the Kremlin propaganda and believes that Navalny was the CIA agent or whatever the Kremlin tells about him. So alas, not everyone in Russia was taken by his energy and his messages.
Now, Navalny's widow lives outside Russia and didn't attend the funeral today. She has vowed to continue her husband's fight. What role do you think she could play going forward?
Well, it depends on how she proceeds. She's a different person. She kept always slightly sort of in the shadow of Alexei, and she has to become her own self, her own political self. I think that what we've seen so far points to the fact that Alexei, whom I happen to know personally too, was correct to say that she's probably more radical than he is in opposition to Putin. But of course, it means that she will have to recreate his team, to boost it, to find her own messages and her own image. And that is a big task for her. If she succeeds, then I'm absolutely certain she'll pose a danger to Putin, even from the outside, even from exile.
That was Konstantin Egad. Always a pleasure to get your insights. Thank you so much. The United Nations is calling for an international investigation into the deaths of more than 100 Palestinians killed during an aid delivery in Gaza. Families of the victims say Israeli troops opened fire. Now, the Israeli army has admitted firing shots at people near the aid convoy, but it says most of the deaths occurred during a stampede. The UN has warned that a quarter of Gaza's population is currently at risk of famine.
Friends and family mourning their dead. Injured survivors on the floor receiving treatment. These people say they were shot by Israeli troops as they went to meet an aid shipment.
After they stopped shooting, we went back to get our aid. By the time I got flour and some canned goods and took it down from the truck, they shot at us. They shot me and the truck driver left and ran over my leg. I lost my nerves. If you want to give us aid this way, then you might as well not bring us anything.
Israel has a different account. This is a video released by the military. Its spokesperson says it shows mobs looting humanitarian aid from trucks.
The trucks were overwhelmed, and the people driving the trucks, which were Gazan civilian drivers, plowed into the crowds of people. Ultimately killing, my understanding is, tens of people. I don't have anything more specific to that. It is unfolding.
Gaza's health ministry, which is controlled by Hamas, says dozens were killed at the aid drop site. This brings the ministry's death toll, which does not separate Gazan civilians from fighters, to 30,000. That unprecedented human cost has spurred calls for a resolution.
The war in Gaza must end. Clear violations of international human rights and humanitarian laws, including war crimes and possibly other crimes under international law, have been committed by all parties.
Mediators say that Hamas and Israel are on the cusp of a truce, but aid groups say that before that happens, some northern Gazans may not survive the famine that will result from aid not getting through.
And here's a quick look at some other stories making headlines around the world today. The European Commission is releasing a €50 million payment to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, or UNRWA, after earlier halting its funding. The freeze followed Israeli claims that some agency staff took part in the October 7th Hamas terror attacks. The Commission decided to make the payment after UNRWA made commitments to carry out an investigation. U.S. President Joe Biden says his country will help deliver more aid into Gaza. Meeting with Italy's prime minister, he said Washington would work with Jordan and others to plan a humanitarian aid airdrop. Officials declined to discuss the exact timing, but said the drop could happen in the coming days. Nicaragua has filed a case against Germany at the International Criminal Court of Justice for giving financial and military aid to Israel. Nicaragua's claim is that Germany is violating the 1948 Genocide Convention and the 1949 Geneva Convention on the laws of war in the occupied Palestinian territories. Voters in Iran have been electing a new parliament and a powerful religious body called the Assembly of Experts. To Iran's political establishment, the elections are a test of public sentiment following a social uprising in 2022 and 2023. The last parliamentary elections 4 years ago saw the smallest vote since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Now, Iran is suffering an economic crisis and has been rocked by nationwide anti-government protests.
The signs are everywhere and the messaging is clear. Iran has been scrambling to boost voter turnout ahead of Friday's election. It's introducing electronic voting in several cities, and the number of female candidates vying for a seat is more than double what it was in the last parliamentary election in 2020. But the government's efforts appear to be falling on deaf ears.
Personally, I will not take part in this election because the results of the last two elections were not good.
The biggest problem with the election is the people's lack of trust in Parliament.
Political distrust and an ailing economy have helped fuel voter apathy. Although the elections are seen as a crucial barometer for legitimacy, the government's own surveys show participation will be well below 50%. Friday's vote includes polls for members of parliament and the Assembly of Experts, who have the power to appoint Iran's supreme leader. The country's system of pre-approving candidates has led to mass disqualifications and the removal of true choice, according to critics of the current hardline government.
This time, the word election is completely meaningless. It should be called an anti-election or a non-election. The election is rejected by the people, and the Islamic Republic cannot sell it to them.
The memory of Mahsa Amini is also casting a long shadow over this year's vote. The 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian died after she was taken into police custody for allegedly violating the Islamic dress code. Her death led to a wave of mass protests against the hijab law and other social issues in 2022. The movement was violently crushed by authorities, but the demands for change and an end to the Islamic Republic's rule endure.
Ali Fatullah-Nejad is a German-Iranian political scientist who heads the Center for Middle East and Global Order think tank here in Berlin, and he told us how Iranians feel about these elections.
I think it is quite clear, even for the regime itself, that for these elections, there is not much enthusiasm. Quite on the contrary, we can expect the repetition of the last two major elections in Iran over the, in the last few years for the parliament and the presidency, which already saw a historic low voter turnout. So this time around, we can also expect the same, probably even lower. Because the regime legitimacy has been further eroding, also in the wake of national uprisings that you mentioned earlier. So what we actually can expect, in fact, is that the regime gonna proclaim a fake voter turnout.
Would that do much to legitimize them, though?
Well, I don't believe so, because disillusionment is quite vast in Iran. It's quite widespread. There is also no illusion among Iranians that those elections are, going to lead to some change. So everyone is well aware that it's quite farcical. So what we are going to see is, basically the social base of the regime who are going to go to the ballot boxes. And this social base of the regime has also been quite eroding. So basically, we're talking about 10 to 15% of the population who either ideologically or economically are somehow attached to the Islamic Republic of Iran. So basically, it's a contestation within a very small part of Iranian society, those who benefit from the regime and are ideologically very committed, especially to the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned the protests of 2022 and 2023. I want to know from you, how has this uprising, this movement, played into the vote and the campaigning ahead of it?
Well, it has definitely played into regime calculations that for months now, they've been very worried about the repetition of a historically low voter turnout. So over the last few months, we've seen quite a lot of agitation by regime officials and affiliated media, urging Iranians to go to the ballot boxes because otherwise it would strengthen the so-called enemies of the Islamic Republic. But all those, narratives are not working anymore. So what we can expect is, as I said before, a repetition of a historically low voter turnout, and hence also the proclamation of a high voter, a fake high voter turnout. Just 3 days ago, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps affiliated media, first talked about an expectation of 71% of Iranians going to the polls. So this is, a stark contrast to probably only 10 to maximum 20% of Iranians who may go to the ballot boxes.
As political scientist Ali Fatouhlea-Nejad there. Now, as demand for cocaine grows to unprecedented levels here in Europe, so too does the danger to communities where the drug is sourced. Organized crime gangs are fighting over the billions of dollars in black market money to be made. Germany is now one of the countries trying to rally international authorities to coordinate efforts to interrupt international supply lines.
General Loaiza has got his hands full. Thousands of containers are loaded in the Peruvian port of Callao every day, and cocaine could be hidden in any of them. Demand in Europe is increasing, and so is drug smuggling. Loaiza's anti-drug team is on daily patrol. Intel about any potential suspicious containers would be game-changing for law enforcers.
We absolutely need an international exchange of information with all the investigating authorities so that we can seize the drugs and the criminals behind them.
Due to rising demand, coca cultivation in Peru has doubled since 2015. The drug is almost exclusively exported to Europe. In Germany, a record 35 tons were seized last year alone. That's why Germany's Federal Minister of the Interior, Nancy Faeser, is travelling to South America, offering greater collaboration between nations.
I've already seen the spiral in violence in Belgium and the Netherlands. Public prosecutors and journalists have been shot dead, and I would like to prevent that from happening in Germany. 2,000 drug-related deaths are not just a few. And it's not just about people dying, it's the huge impoverishment associated with violence and huge profits.
In Peru, rainforests are being cleared for drug cultivation. Coca farmers earn just enough to survive, while international smugglers make billions. The rule of law is being undermined by corruption.
We have a shared responsibility. Countries that consume must cooperate with countries that produce, because this is where the damage is done, the environmental destruction and the murders.
Negotiations for a security agreement are to begin soon. More education and training are planned, and a greater exchange of information. The importance of information sharing was demonstrated for the anti-drug police at the end of January. A tip-off enables the team to seize over 7 tons of cocaine in the port of Callao. The cocaine is embedded in wooden panels. The smugglers are getting more and more creative, and it's becoming harder to find.
It's a great satisfaction, not just for me, but for everyone who has worked with us. We are always after the drugs with the aim of finding the people behind them.
That's why cooperation is so important, and any help is welcome. Because the drug business is poisoning society and the people who use them.
For more on that, let's bring in DW's Latin America correspondent Nicole Rees, who's in Colombia's capital, Bogota, where German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser is currently visiting. Nicole, first of all, can you explain how big an issue the fight against drug cultivation and smuggling is there in Colombia?
Well, Nicole, we just heard it there in the report. It's quite a huge issue still, even though the Colombian government has, for example, in 2023, seized hundreds of tons of cocaine and has been destroying time and again cocaine plantations. It seems to be something that is difficult to get rid of just because there is so much money involved. This is a $1 billion business. The huge challenge, according to a police official that I talked to today from Colombia's national police, is that the people involved, the international and national players, are more and more becoming sort of invisible, are smarter in their ways. And this is why there needs to be more international collaboration, because in the end, this is not only an issue for Colombia or Germany, this is an issue for many countries here in Latin America. Peru, Brazil, Ecuador very prominently has been in the news just a few weeks ago because of its security issues due to this drug violence as well. And here from the ports from Latin America, the produce is arriving at the shores of Europe, and that we're talking about hundreds of tons of cocaine every year, and that's only the part that authorities are actually detecting. They're only detecting a fraction, so there must be much more arriving. This is where international collaboration is highly needed, because as we just heard in this report, this is not only about a drug that is going to Europe, this is also about people's lives that are in danger, people who are being killed, or the environment being destroyed, and the poverty that goes hand in hand with this business, at least for locals that are in the affected areas where cocaine is being produced.
Yeah, Nicole, so what could that cooperation look like?
So today here in Bogota, there was a sort of an agreement, a letter of intent was signed, and this letter of intent foresees that there is a profound exchange of information on both sides. So, for example, here in Colombia, when they receive information about activities of narcotráfico, of drug smuggling or drug production, they can go after it and also use this in court officially. This was not as such before, as I was being told by the national police. There's also the intent of having more training here on site for authorities so they can get more involved in their investigation. Investigation was a quite big word here today. This is where they have their focus. They want to have preventive measures, but also follow the money that goes into the drug trafficking and smuggling, so they can actually really hunt down the international players that are involved and that sit in different countries, like, for example, Mexico, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Peru. So these were the things that were agreed. There is no money involved, apparently. Germany is not sending any money to the countries that it had visited. That was a surprise, but as Nancy Faeser, the German Interior Minister, put it, they're also sending people over here to get some training done. So that, in a sense, is also money. And she wasn't asked for money, she said, from Latin American countries either.
That was DW correspondent Nicole Rees reporting from Bogota. Thank you so much for that. Thousands of Nigerians have joined protests at soaring living costs during the worst economic crisis in a generation. President Bola Tinubu has taken some tough action to stabilize prices. A popular but expensive fuel subsidy has been scrapped. Tinubu has also floated Nigeria's currency, but the naira has sunk to an all-time low against the US dollar nonetheless.
Most people in Nigeria come to open markets like this one to buy food and other essentials for their daily lives. This is one place where you can easily see the economic crunch.
2 months ago, this 5,000 naira, which is the equivalent of about $3, would have been enough to prepare a pot of Nigerian stew for my family of 3 to eat for a whole week. Now, I would have been able to get this much tomatoes, pepper, onions, and even 1 kilo of chicken. But today, this same 5,000 naira can only get me this much and about half a kilo of chicken, which would be enough for just 2 days of food.
We people are suffering. We are hungry. There is no money. We are suffering. We didn't even have money to send our children to school.
What is happening now is too hard. If I could speak directly to the president, I would beg him to have mercy on us. Things are too hard.
We don't know what to do. Things are very tough for Nigeria. Let government consider and know what to do to help people.
It's not only foodstuff that have become very expensive. The costs of other essentials have also shot up. This roll of tissue used to cost 400 naira. Now it's 700. This sanitary pad, women use this every month, used to cost 250 naira. Now it's 750.
This price hike is particularly affecting the middle class, who have suddenly found themselves poor. Things like clothes and shoes have become a luxury. Akinseye Olakunle is a fashion designer whose company has been hit hard by the cost of the dollar for imported materials. He says people often can't afford his ready-to-wear clothes anymore, and today he's struggling to stay afloat.
Almost everybody here, or most business owners, import all their stuff. You don't know import it directly, import it indirectly. Do you understand? You buy from someone that imports it. So everybody is connected one way or the other to that dollar thing. So we are all connected to it one way or the other, except the only way we can break out if Nigeria itself can start producing something and the naira itself start gaining value.
After a long day of trying to get food and clothes, it would have been great to order an Uber, but the prices are so high that most middle-class people are taking the bus, and the poorer ones who would normally take the bus, they are walking.
For me, I've been trekking. It's not a good one. You can see that I'm all sweaty because I trekked from a very long distance and it's telling on us.
This time, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, if I want to walk a very short distance, most times I decide to board bike, I decide to board Uber or whatever, but now I'd rather trek, you understand, than wasting money on bike because things are really crazy at the moment, you get.
Fixing Nigeria's failing economy was one of the main promises made by recently elected President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. But less than 1 year after his taking office, things are going in the opposite direction.